Welcome back to another scintillating episode of School Transportation Nation. I'm Ryan Gray, Editor-in-Chief of School Transportation News, and I'm joined here by my Associate Editor, Taylor Hannon. We'll say hi to her real quickly. But first, I want to remind you all that this episode, as all of them, are brought to you by our friends at TransFinder, the leader in school bus routing software. Speaking of which, did you hear about the all-new Route Finder Plus getting pumped up? We already know how powerful TransFinder's browser-based Route Finder Plus is, with full calendar-based routing, artificial intelligence optimization, option for right-side pickup and approach, powerful report writer, and unlimited user-defined fields. TransFinder also recently added some amazing new features that really bumped it up, like live traffic option, form finder to make all your paper forms electronic, email, mail merge with student schedules, and exceptions on student schedules. Oh, and it's super fast. Be the first in your state to contact TransFinder at getplus@transfinder.com. That's getplus@transfinder.com, and mention the STN podcast to receive a Grubhub gift card. So, as I said, everybody, friends, neighbors, and relatives, joined once again by Taylor Hannon. Taylor, what a crazy start to the school year, huh? We have these driver shortages that everyone is tripping over, and now mask mandates. Are we mandated? Can we require them? Can we not? There's several states out there that have actually passed bans on masks. You've been covering a lot of the back to school happenings around the nation. What are you hearing and seeing out there?
Well, definitely masks are a big question. What are the guidelines? Which guidelines do we follow? Who really has control over that, right? And then to throw it all off, the supply shortage is still a problem, right? So people are still waiting for parts. People are still waiting for buses, which throws another crinkle into the whole back to school operations. And so I feel like right now, transportation directors have so many decisions to make, so many obstacles in front of them. And so I am so happy I'm not a transportation director right now. Let me tell you, Ryan.
It takes some very thick skin, certainly. I was just talking with someone the other day, and it feels like the conversation right now is very reminiscent of what it was back in late February, early March of 2020, right? Before we were really gotten into this thing, before everything completely shut down. Now, I don't want to be a negative Nelly, but boy, it just doesn't seem like we were going on along a right path for a while there over the summer. And then just in the last week or two, just these whammies being thrown at the entire society as well as the industry as schools are getting back. We just posted a story last week on the masks and kind of the confusion. Of course, we had talked about the CDC. They issued revised guidelines a few weeks ago on indoor masking for all people, regardless of vaccination status. And so a lot of folks have taken that and they're still saying, well, what about school buses? We understand that the previous guidance from CDC back a few months ago that on all public transit and school busing that masks were required, that still is in effect. Now, again, these are guidelines. The article up right now on our special report section of STN Online talks about some of the differing opinions and the confusion because you have, basically states' rights versus federal. And that's been a long-standing issue in our country, but certainly with masks at the forefront of it right now. Interestingly enough, there are some school districts that are already back and have been back for a couple of weeks now. I spoke with some folks down in Arkansas. That's one of the states that has on the books a law that bans any mask requirement. Governor Asa Hutchinson, he actually came out last week and he's voiced regret that he actually signed the bill because of this Delta variant and, especially as it's affecting children now. Just last week, as we were recording this podcast, Little Rock Public Schools, they filed an injunction in court to try to get around that law. There's basically a special session that's been called at the legislature that right now they're debating that. But seemingly, because it is a Republican stronghold, it seems like that law will not be changed. But some really interesting data that's coming out of Arkansas, and I really wanted to highlight this before we move on. The first district in the state to go back is Marion School District, which is in West Memphis, right there along the border with Tennessee. And they went back a couple weeks ago, the first in the state to do so. And, already through last week, they had 839 students quarantined because of COVID. Now, not all those had COVID-19. They had about, maybe a dozen or so cases, actual positive cases. But that was resulting in just tons of quarantines of students and teachers. The district actually made a statement that said, again, if all students and teachers had been wearing a mask appropriately, then today's 13 positive cases, this is from August 5th, those cases would be isolated and there would be no resulting quarantines for anyone else. So again, we seem to have stepped from the frying pan into the fryer again on this thing. We're going to be staying tuned to what's going on with this, late breaking and bringing you guys all the latest information as we know it. So stay tuned. Taylor, it's also being August. Let's turn our attention real quickly to the magazine. We featured our annual Garage Stars this month. So those folks in the school bus maintenance operations who are ensuring that the buses remain on the road, have that uptime so kids can get to and from school and their activities. Of course, hopefully, we're not going backwards anymore from this thing. No one wants to go back to remote learning. But Taylor, you spoke to several of our Garage Stars. Why don't you take us through that a little bit? Tell us what you learned.
Yeah, Ryan. Honestly, I think August would have to be my favorite month. It is my birth month. But also because I do love talking to the Garage Stars because I feel like they go under the radar so much. So when I finally get to email them and connect with them, it's so rewarding to hear their responses and have that conversation with them. This past year, I talked to Stephanie Foster. So she's featured in the magazine for 2021. And she is the second woman mechanic in the state of Alabama. She's the shop assistant for Pell City school system in the state. And so just hearing her talk about how she got into, being a mechanic, how she fell into the school bus side of things. And then she also has 2 kids and one being a female. So being that role model, for her daughter to show her daughter, hey, you can do whatever you want to do. If cars, mechanics is your thing, like go after it. And I think that's such a great message to be sending. I love profiling women in the industry. I talked to women, 2 years ago, talking about women leadership in school transportation. So I definitely think it's becoming more prominent a little bit. But that's not to say we didn't highlight some amazing males as well. Lots of master techs, ASE technicians, lots of great things in this magazine issue. So I definitely encourage everyone to go check it out, stnonline.com. It's there under digital editions.
Yeah, that really jumped out to me, the merit of these men and women. And certainly to your point, I remember several years ago reaching out to districts. We did a survey and asking them about female hires, and there was nothing. And, still not as many as there need to be or as there should be, but was heartened by the fact of seeing a couple of female names in the nominations this year. So keep it up. And especially as we look at an impending mechanic shortage that's going to hit the entire trucking industry. That's been forecasted for a while. We mentioned that the driver shortage, that always seems to get a lot of the headlines, and rightfully so, because that's always an issue impacting student transportation. But, certainly in the garage, we can't lose those folks either. We need to keep them. And what are we doing to retain them and cultivate the next round of school bus technicians? So again, just one of the latest challenges and opportunities that is before the industry. And speaking of that shortage, I had the opportunity to speak with a reporter from an NPR station up in New York State last week about the driver shortage, back to school, bell times, a lot of the issues that we've been writing about in school transportation news, both the magazine and online, and talking about here on the podcast. So just again, showed me that, we're all in the same game here, this uphill battle. It's always good to also be able to share some industry background with media, and hopefully they can pass that word along, because it's all about communication to the general public to, again, really show them and preach to them the importance of school busing.
And I think that's why it's going to be so important to have our in-person shows again coming up this fall, get those transportation directors together, get them talking on these important issues so they can get back to sharing their ideas and kind of get back to normal, hopefully, Ryan.
Absolutely. Yeah, we do have the STN Expo Indianapolis coming up first, October 1st through the 5th. We do have an agenda up. If you head over to stnexpo.com/east, go in there and go to the conference overview by going up to the top menu for attendees, so you can check out what we have planned. And certainly there's still a lot that we're continuing to develop, so stay tuned. And, right on the heels, we have TSD conference in Frisco, Texas, November 17th to the 21st. And last but certainly not least, STN Expo Reno, December 4th to the 9th. So stay tuned. We're in the midst of continuing to fine tune the details on the conferences. So we hope to see you there. Coming up next, I'm going to be speaking with Christina Albin, Transportation Supervisor for Menahga School District number 821 in Minnesota. Stay tuned. Want to welcome to the School Transportation Nation stage Christina Albin, Transportation Supervisor at Menahga Independent School District 821 in Minnesota. Christina, thanks for joining us.
Hi. Yeah, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
So where is Menahga Independent School District in Minnesota?
We are the north central Minnesota. Like what I always tell anybody is if you take your finger and stick it on Duluth, most people know where Duluth is. It's at the tip of Lake Superior. And if you go straight west and stop about middle of the state, you're probably just about right on Menahga. So that's about where we are.
Okay, so farmland.
It is, very much.
Lots of farmland. Lots of lakes, obviously, as well.
Oh, yes. North of us are tons of lakes. That's where most of the more than 10,000 lakes in Minnesota are.
There you go. The 9,999 of them are up there, and you're up north of you.
Oh, it's more than 10,000. Yes.
So you guys are pretty rural. I know I've got some good friends in the industry that have some farms up in your area.
Okay.
Have not been able to get up there. I want to do so soon. So take us through your operations a little bit. So you guys transport roughly 1,000 students, correct?
That is correct.
And you fleet about 24 school buses?
We have 24 school buses and we run 18 routes. Those are regular routes. Plus we have 7 special needs routes for students that need specialized transportation.
Okay. So, you're literally weeks away now, or maybe days away from starting the school district here, as we're now in the beginning of August. And you recently sat down with one of our writers, Eric Wilson, and you helped provide some information for an article that we have out in August on kind of fleet optimization and utilization from the standpoint of getting ready for the school year. So a lot of districts right now, as they reopen, they're kind of, forced to reallocate or kind of, utilize in a different way their traditional fleets. How has coming out of COVID-19 affected you all up there at Menahga?
What's been really interesting, Ryan, is that we did have some times where we had people in quarantine. We did have some drivers and almost entire routes that may have been in quarantine for a brief period of time. But truthfully, there were some dynamics that allowed us to continue to be in-person learning the entire school year. We never once closed. Isn't that amazing?
Oh, absolutely.
So what happened to contribute to that was a couple of things. First of all, our school just added on a whole new section of the school building. So we got a whole nother third of our school. So the whole high school end of the school is all brand new. So we got a lot more space. So everybody was spread out anyway. But then once COVID came, and things started having to be put in place as far as requirements with masking and things like that, we had over 200 students that were withdrawn. So families that chose to homeschool their students or put them in other types of schooling environments. So less bodies, more space allowed us to spread out quite nicely. And with that, less students on the buses and just a few little modifications, and we've been able to keep our routes too.
What are those modifications? What have they been?
Just very slight modifications. Like, for example, we're trying to keep the distances our requirements were we had to keep our buses at half the stated capacities, but spread everybody out as much as possible. And we worked with each driver individually also to make sure that they were working and being able to operate within their comfort zone as well. But and working with the local health departments and things, they were able to help us specific for our area as like based on the number of cases, outbreaks, things like that. Because we're, like you mentioned, we're very rural out here. Lots of elbow room. So there wasn't that much happening on the COVID cases side. So it allowed us to stay within the parameters that we have to do for the state as far as, masking, distancing, things like that. So when it came to our school buses with those less bodies on the buses, and then we've only had to have about 4 or 5 of our routes had to be modified a little to either take some families from another route to put on a route that didn't have hardly as much, that kind of thing. Just some small modifications that really didn't take a whole lot of effort to fix.
With that effort, though, how do you do your routing? Is it
by our hands?
By hands? Okay, the old-fashioned way?
We do a lot of it.
A lot of districts that I speak with, that especially are smaller, see the benefit in still doing that, where it's you almost know all your kids by name, if not by face, and it's just easier to go about doing it that way. Seems like something else, per Eric's reporting, that was new that came out of COVID was seating, assigned seating.
Correct.
You made a comment that your drivers are really like that. A lot of districts, especially a lot larger ones, have been, assigned seating has been the norm for decades, but some of the smaller districts as well, COVID, that was something that was born from the pandemic.
Yeah, it was. So our school is a K-12 school. So a lot of the families, they come on, together. And a lot of these are really large families. I'm talking 15, 16 kids in a family. So, if you stop and you just about have your bus all full. But a lot of the kids, they just sat with siblings and being able to group families together. A lot of our drivers quickly saw how easy that was to just assign the seats, and then they knew, okay, who left their jacket, who left their lunch pail, whatever on the bus, or maybe wrote on the back of a seat kind of thing. So a lot of our drivers, like I said, they really saw the importance of that seat assignment, and they took to that, and then they kept it and enforced it. And it kind of gave them that platform to say, hey, we have to because of COVID. So it gave them some extra backing to be able to do something that maybe at once they might have been thinking of doing already.
Okay. And then I do understand something that's arisen from COVID, the budget. So you guys seem to weather things fairly well, but it doesn't sound like new bus purchases are possible for at least the next year.
That's correct. Because, like I mentioned, we had lost 200 students. And of course, that equates to around $2 million, for our budget. So, yeah, that made us pull our purse strings a lot tighter. Our district said, thankfully, we've been able to upgrade over the past 6 years, 5-6 years, and being able to make use of the VW grant and things out there to get newer buses. So thankfully, already our fleet is pretty new. We've got just about 5 or 6 buses that are more on the older side that do eventually need to be replaced. But yeah, that's something we understand that we have to do, that we just have to wait.
So you mentioned the VW grants. How much money did you get, and for what buses?
I'm really, Brian, I do not know exactly how much we received for the VW grants, but we did get to do that for 2 of our buses. So we were able to replace 2 of them that were really quite old. One of them was still a manual transmission with air brakes and everything. So,
oh, wow. Are these diesel buses? Or?
Yes, they are. All of our buses still are diesel buses.
Okay. Yeah, because I know in several states, much to the chagrin of some of the alternative fuels folks, diesel was included in several of the state plans. But I know that biodiesel is very big up in your neck of the woods. And I remember when biodiesel was just coming onto the playing field, and there was a lot of issues, especially, being with those cold winters. But a lot of that stuff has been figured out, or at least better than it was.
Mhm.
So what kind of blend are you using, and how has that been working for you guys?
Well, we definitely have to watch the temperatures. We got to watch how things go, So, in the hardest, coldest part of winter, we're doing like we're really close to right at number one. We keep a higher, better blend with winter additives in our fuel that keep the buses from freezing up, keeping those lines working. And then, of course, then it comes around summer, we're kind of back down to number two diesel. So we, depending on what we have in the tank, how much we have to get, and what type of temperatures we have coming up, all those little factors determine what blend of diesel we need to get.
And with a lot of operations your size, you have one mechanic
We have one mechanic. Yeah,
working on the buses, so he's staying busy.
he is. He is. He is quite on top of everything. He's never just sitting back and relaxing and having coffee all the time or anything like that. But he's right on top of everything. He has a really great communication system with the drivers, and they tell him every little bitty thing, like a small little light or something went out or a screw fell out somewhere. So.
And like a lot of districts, you guys have been dealing with supply shortages. So like with those lights or whatnot, I mean, it's been just across the board. Steels, prices have been through the roof, aluminum, resin for the plastics. Of course, down south, they had some fuel issues there for a while in the spring, microchips. So, how you guys been, how has your mechanic been dealing with the supply shortages?
So our mechanic, his name is Daryl, and there's things that he can go ahead and try to order ahead of time, at least put in a bigger order for our brake pads or something like that he could start getting, kind of on the waiting list, so to speak. So when those items come in, he can keep his stock replenished. So that's what he tries to do, just tries to stay up on it, ordering a little extra or an extra item of something. So he doesn't let his shelf get empty on the basic things that he always needs, But the other stuff, sometimes they might have to park a bus and wait until it can get in,
In terms of technology,
Mm-hmm.
what are you guys using? And I know you're doing manual routing still, but are you using technology? I know obviously a lot of school buses have video cameras, although not some like LA Unified and New York City don't, or just now are coming online with them. It's crazy to think that. And what's your wish list? If you obviously, like we've talked a little, funding was down by you're down $2 million, so you're having to forego school bus purchases. Obviously, that's going to extend probably to equipment as well. But where do you want to see your department go in terms of technology?
Okay, so for technology, what we do use right now, Ryan, is that we use the camera systems on our buses. So we do have that as a DVR type thing, and then we just have to go in, and we don't have live feed, so we don't have that ability. We only are able to go in and check on things after somebody brings something to our attention. So that's what we have, at least as far as technology goes. We do have 3 of our buses that have Wi-Fi on them, because at one time they were the main buses that went on sports trips. So those were the ones that we sent, so the students would be able to have Wi-Fi access. What I would like to see happening down the road, and as you mentioned earlier, is we do a lot of our routing by hand. So thanks to like Google Maps and things like that, that's what we've been able to use to create mapping or maps. We do a lot of roster stuff. We use our school system, Infinite Campus, to create roster lists, but it's up to the drivers to basically put them in order and then create maps. So, and I try to do what I can to assist them with that. But what I would like to see happen is that at some point we would be able to obtain some routing software and being able to use that in conjunction with our Infinite Campus system to be able to create routes and maps and things for our drivers and kind of expedite the system a little better. That's what I'd like to see happen. I don't know when it will happen.
Well, maybe not this year, but there's always next year. So hopefully you get all those kids back in the bus this school year, and you can get your funding from the state back up to where it needs to be, so it can make that happen. Well, Christina, thank you so much. Really appreciate you coming on The Nation today and sharing the story up there in Menahga.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Hey, thanks to Ryan and Christina for joining me today on this episode, and we appreciate our friends at TransFinder for sponsoring it. Definitely check out stnonline.com for your latest news and expert analysis on the school bus industry. Lots going up on back to school, so hopefully some relevant information for you guys there. Learn more and register now for all of our upcoming in-person shows at stnexpo.com and tsdconference.com. I definitely hope to see everyone there. Once again, thank you guys all for listening. Subscribe, stream, review on Apple Podcasts. I know Tony loves those 5-star reviews, so let's pump those up. Spotify, stnspodcast.com, wherever you guys listen. All right, see you guys next week, and thanks again for listening.